And it's a great pleasure to be back with you. So many friends. Thank you for being here and bringing your full curiosity and selves into this space with us. We've been really looking forward to this session. You might have seen my post that this book was very instrumental in me in thinking about this entire series. So I have a huge thanks to share with Guido and Ulrich in influencing my thinking. Welcome, Habiba. Going back a number of years, and this is a lot. This is kind of there's a pulse that goes through this book that connects a lot of the dots we're really hoping to emphasize in this series. So this is the fourth author session, and in a way, it's kind of our third and last section that's dedicated to ethics. Not that the other sessions for the rest of the year won't touch on ethics, but the three sessions that we've done, this kind of they make their own triad around ethics, and this is the third. So I'm here as usual with my colleagues Anna and Anthony, and today I will be facilitating the author discussion. And pleased to bring in Guido and Ulrich into the space. So they are both professors at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland and teach in the Faculty of Business. Guido is a professor of business ethics. Ulrich is a professor of decision theory. And they are long collaborators with each other. And do you want to bring your voices into the space so we get to hear you for a moment?
Thanks for having us.
Hi, Adam. Hi, everyone. Hello. Thanks for being here.
Thank you both. And maybe Anna, do you want to set up the container for us?
Yes, thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. Happy 2026. So happy to see your faces here with us. I'm super excited about this conversation. As Adam said, it's the third one in this series where we are talking about ethics, and we are really grateful for the authors who are here today and their amazing work, and also for this amazing group, as Adam said, bringing your vulnerability and openness with us. This series is also part of our intention to speak more openly about painful organizational realities and possibilities, including what individual and collective pathways towards healing might look like. And because this conversation about ethics at work may touch on past experiences of harm, pain, and trauma that some of us have lived through, we want to set a container that supports care and steadiness, and have realized we kind of skipped some important reminders in our previous sessions that also touched on ethics, but well, better late than never, I guess. So having a kind of learning out loud moment for us as a team as well, and being more disciplined about these things. We know that the conversations might get activating, and we invite you to pay attention to these reactions. Take a break if you need. Feel free to step back, turn camera off, do a quick somatic exercise, or jot down a few notes. We will also be available through chat if you need more support. And we ask everyone to also notice patterns like defensiveness, urgency to be right, or taking disproportionate airtime, so we can protect the quality of attention in the room, both for ourselves and for each other. And I'm pretty sure this group is amazing and we didn't even need to do that, but I think it's good to kind of set the container in that way. So with that, I will pass over back to you, Adam.
Anthony.
Yeah, I think it's me. Good morning. It's so good to see you guys. Happy New Year. We're really excited about this. And the curious thing is from three different perspectives. For me, and my super nerdy vibe came out in terms of really thinking about this in terms of systems and those other factors that are at play and things of that nature. And it's one of the reasons why we chose the dark pattern is because this is extremely relevant and important to shed light into the organizational maze. You know, we have this individual actor that seemingly does some wonky stuff in this collective organizational context, and it's really interesting. Diving deeper, being more specific, moral failures are not often personal character flaws, but contextual ones. And I think the dark patterns kind of illuminate that. And then what's really interesting for me, because I really like to play at the margins, is that context is designed, managed, and influenced. And so we will get into all of this in the flow of 90 minutes. We will begin with Mentimeter and discussion, then flow into the dialogue with Adam, Guido, and Ulrich. Then we will do the fishbowl, and then we will close. And as Adam stated before, the recording is only the first part, but we'll stop at the fishbowl for sensitivity.
Well, I think we will come to some of these points. The agency is something we discuss in the book as key, because if you look at the people who engage in the behaviors that we describe in the book, all kind of unethical, illegal behaviors, not the top managers, but the ones in the middle, if you ask them why they did it, the key answer you get is always, I thought I had no choice. So these people act without the feeling of agency. So what you discuss here, what you mentioned here, the importance to understand how much agency do I have, what are my options, to have these thoughts, that's super important. Because if you don't think about options before, if you don't have this plan B, you will just do what the others do. You will just execute.
So
I have a
maybe
question to follow up on that, actually.
yeah, go ahead, Monique.
So are you saying we always have agency, I guess? Is there ever a case where you don't have agency?
There are three options that we always have, and they're called loyalty, voice, and exit. Loyalty means I do what I'm told to do. Voice means I speak up against what I see is wrong. And if voice doesn't help, I still have the option exit. I can leave. I do something else. But that's where I refer to the plan B. If you don't think about what could I do if that job doesn't work, if that company doesn't work anymore for me, if that career doesn't work for me anymore, if you don't have this plan ready, at least in your mind, then you don't have the exit option. Because then you will think that this company, this career, this bonus, this team, that is what that's all you have. If you don't have that anymore, you are lost. So you will do what it takes to survive and you will shut up. So having the option to exit the system is what you need to create, in my view. And that's what the people who are engaging in these unacceptable practices don't have.
That's a nuance that I'm glad you asked that question, Monique. That's a nuance I hadn't picked up, Guido, in the work, which is you're suggesting a kind of pre-planning for an exit or an assumption that you may need an exit, I guess is what you have an operating assumption that there may be a time you may be confronting a situation that is so untenable that you may need an exit, and so therefore one should always consider or somehow pre-plan for a potential exit?
It's a thought experiment most of the time. So if my university would fire me tomorrow, which probably will never happen, but if it happens, I would have 3, 4, 5 ideas of what I could do next. And that's what I mean. But you have, in a way, to prepare these alternatives by education, by networking. So you need to be ready to think about it without necessarily needing it. But just the thought can be very liberating. I could do something else. And we looked a bit, in one of the scandals we investigate in the book is the Tour de France doping scandal, Lance Armstrong, who wins the Tour de France 7 times in a row using EPO, a drug that gives him more performance. And they all were using it, all these professional cyclists, most of them. And there were just very, very few who would not do it and who would even speak up about it. And if you look at the biographies of these people, there's something they have in common. In contrast to almost all the other cyclists, they have done an apprenticeship or they have studied at university. They have an option. But if you're Lance Armstrong, you're sitting on the bike since you are maybe 10, 12 years old, you have nothing else. You never finished even school. That's all you have. That's all you are in a way. And if you lose that, you lose identity. So of course you will do whatever it takes. But if you have something else you could do, you're free to choose. And that freedom, that's powerful when it comes to ethical or unethical decisions.
You find that the people who have the most clarity about their exit are therefore more likely to use their voice. Like they'll at least try to change the system, knowing that if they fail, they can leave. Like, is there a direct corollary to knowing I have an exit is when I'll use my voice, or can you illuminate on that at all?
I would say there are three things that have to come together. First of all is you know who you are. You know what your values are, where you want to end up with your life, your vision of a good life. The second is you know the limit. You have defined for yourself what you would do and what you would not do before the situation comes. Because when the situation comes, it's too late. You sleepwalk into it normally. So you know what values you hold, you know who you are, you know what limits you have, and you have a plan B. There's this famous quote from the Harvard professor Christensen that we cite in the book, who once said that it's easier to stick 100% to your values than 98%. Because if you stick 98% to it, you make this little compromise. And that little compromise brings you on the slippery slope. It opens up to the next compromise, which becomes easier because of the first one. So sticking to the values, having a plan B, and knowing where to say no. This combination, I think, is the best protection.
I have a comment on that. Agency somehow implies that we can do something, that we have our own goals, set our own goals, have our own agenda, our own dreams. And I think that's very important. And it relates to our plan B because we have to work on that. We have to prepare that. And if this is the case, then I think it's okay to speak of agency. One sentence we have in the book is the strongest source of power in a negotiation is the ability to walk away, which corresponds to this exit, right? So, but then how Guido started with his loyalty voice or exit, to me, this is a bit reactive. So like you are confronted with a situation, with an environment, with a boss, with an order. And then the question is, what do you do? How do you react to this? And this somehow reminds me of Pigeon in the Skinner box, right? So there's an external stimuli, and the question is, what do you do about it? Agency for me is more. Agency is not just reacting to something that's out there, but it has more to do with you, who you are, who you want to be, where you want to go. And this is not necessarily only reaction to something out there. This could be you are in a situation where nothing bad's going on, you feel comfortable, no challenges, no unethical orders or so. But still, you could think, what do I want to do now? Without any necessity. And this is for me another dimension. So reaction or agency.
I love that we're already diving into the deep end. I do want to step back a little bit and talk about. I want to talk about your own development around this work. Starting maybe it started before the ethical blindness research, which I think that paper came out around 2013 that you released, and the extensive work that you've done, not just with students, but with many of the companies that have been cited in this book. I'm really curious about how you've been moved by this work and why this book was the next link for you in connecting dots that maybe built from the work that stemmed from the ethical blindness understanding and the work inside of organizations.
If I may start, and Ulrich will then add his own view on that, because we both work together on that topic and come from various directions. I'm a philosopher, Ulrich, a decision-making psychologist, so we have our different views on doing the right thing, the wrong thing, and how to explain it. My background led me very early as a PhD student in philosophy in contact with the work of Hannah Arendt and her banality of evil. So this idea that bad things are not necessarily done by bad people. You can create extraordinarily horrible contexts, like in this case that she analyzed the Holocaust in Germany. And you do not even need many bad people for that. You just need people doing their job, doing their following their incentive. So this idea that evil is not necessarily the result of an evil character is what I found always fascinating. And when you look at how scandals are discussed in public, it's the contrary. They're always discussed as the result of the intentional wrongdoing of some really bad people. That can be Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos, for instance. Someone who creates a scheme to defraud the society, to enrich themselves, greedy people, bad apples, as they say in America. And if you look at all these documentaries produced on Netflix about corporate scandals, so Dieselgate, Boeing crashes, Wells Fargo, whatever is there, Uber, it's always the same thing. It's presenting the whole problem as the result of the bad intentions and decisions of very few bad apples. But if you zoom into scandals, you see that this story doesn't work. Just take the case of Wells Fargo, where 100,000 salespeople commit fraud on their own customers. 100,000. How do you explain this? By looking at the character, by asking yourself, how can this bank hire so many bad people? That doesn't work. And between that story of the bad apple and Hannah Arendt, there is decades of research in social psychology that shows how we humans are not necessarily the rational actors that we are presented as in economic theory. We are very often doing things on autopilot, influenced by context. Context might include orders of authority, time pressure, group conformity pressure. It includes many things. So we do what we do not because of who we are, but because of the situation we are in. So for us, we wrote this article, Ethical Blindness, that you referred to published in 2013, that summarizes a bit this idea that good people under certain circumstances can do very bad things. And if that is the case, we have to understand not character, we have to understand context. So this article already elaborates a bit on the idea of what can be factors in context that drive those bad behaviors of people. And from there to ask yourself, is there maybe a pattern across all these big scandals that repeats? Is that was for us just the next step. So the book is the continuation of the ethical blindness theory by arguing that in any kind of scandal you find the same things, the same leadership and culture failure again and again. And if we know how this mechanism works, then we might even be able to prevent it from happening or to predict the next scandal. So that was the idea.
Like to add something from my perspective, Guido already, and you, Adam, also mentioned, I'm coming from decision theory. Judgment decision making is my field. And when I look what's going on there in this field, in particular the history and what's told in textbooks and so, one of the earliest theories we have is expected value theory. We have Pascal, then it was replaced by expected utility theory. But there again, you maximize, not value, but utility. But still, it's about maximization. There's a lot of discussion about rationality. What does it mean to be rational? Deviations from rationality, heuristics and biases, all that. But to me, it feels like very risky in a way that it focuses students' attention on this idea of maximization. So this idea or this question, and this is how they are grown up academically. This is how they are socialized. How can I get the most for me? And then surprise, surprise, at some point, they use their elbows and want to fight their way up to the top and get the most. No? They want to maximize for themselves. And this, in a way, paves the way to unethical behavior and the scandals we are then talking about. And I felt in this work with Guido, I'm kind of repairing what's going on in my field when my colleagues frame these poor students and tell them, go out and maximize value, utility.
I'm curious if you don't mind saying a little bit more about that. I'm really interested in that work of repair, of how you're doing it, and I guess what the implications are, because in some ways the book is also calling the bright pattern is its own form of repair. It's trying to repair and stifle the damage at the same time of what has been created and what might be forthcoming. So can you talk a little bit about your process for that kind of repair, students? Ulrich?
If it's bright pattern, I think I rather let Guido answer, but maybe since you looked at me now when you asked.
You said repair. So I'm looking right at you.
Because I was just adding to what Guido said, my perspective coming from judgment decision-making, rationalization, expected utility or expected value maximization. And I felt like this is dangerous. This drives people into something we then analyze as scandals. So this is what I meant with when I said repair. I mean, psychology is so rich and it has to say so much about what people do. And that's not just social judgment decision-making with a strong emphasis on rationality. There's also social psychology. There are attitudes, there are norms, social norms. And I think that is very important as to complement what scholars in my field, judgment decision making, talk about. That's what I meant by repair.
And I think that
more broader perspective. And I like to work and think interdisciplinary.
And I think you're highlighting too the levels of dissonance in all different sectors that exist within business schools and factors in higher education, that you have different worldviews that are intersecting with each other. It also comes into corporate contexts. And we actually have to play in these pools of dissonance with our colleagues. And because you're trying to repair something that was created. I think maybe we'll go into since we're talking about kind of social sense making. If we think about the organizations as spaces for social sense making, you describe unethical workplace behavior thriving due to this kind of failure of social sense making. In a way, it's both a success in the sense of the loyalty piece that you brought up, Guido, earlier, in the sense of we will conform to the structures, we'll conform to the social relationships that surround us, but then it also creates at the same time these ethical breaches. So I was curious for you to reflect on maybe first, how do the dark pattern building blocks, the 9 that you identify, create kind of feedback loops that amplify and exaggerate reality distortions? Because I think that this idea of differing realities is something that you emphasize through multiple scenarios in the book, starting with, I think, the UFO cult group, and and talk about difference in realities and reality distortions in multiple scenarios from some of the case studies. Can you talk a little bit about the dark pattern building blocks kind of as a cohesive way of creating reality distortions?
Yeah, maybe I start and then Guido adds. So our approach is basically to look at the person, but we do not have the bad apple narrative, right? But still the person plays a role, and we discuss issues like framing, moral disengagement. So the share the individual has. But then we say again and again that context can be stronger than reason. And we basically focus on the context and how the context can push us over the moral cliff. But context is something we do not leave in this abstract, foggy way, but we, as you already mentioned, we identified building blocks. So we look at different aspects or elements of the context, and that is basically our theoretical lens that can explain why people can be pushed over the moral cliff. So we have 9 building blocks, and there is no way to summarize this or to pack everything now in a very few-minute response. So recommendation is just read the book. But a few things I think I could still say. These are not isolated elements, they reinforce each other. And they are taken alone, not bad. So just to mention them for those who haven't looked at the book already, we have ideology, leadership, language, goals, incentives, rules, fairness, groups, and change. And there's nothing wrong about any of these, right? Leaders, rules, incentives. But it's a bit like tomatoes or cars. They are neutral. We can, sorry, not tomatoes, knives. We can use a knife to cut a tomato, but we can also kill someone. We can use a car to drive from A to B, but we can also kill someone, right? And so when we look at these 9 building blocks now of the dark pattern, we add these adjectives. So instead of just talking about ideology, we discuss rigid ideology. Instead of just talking about leadership, we discuss toxic leadership. So we basically discuss how each of these elements can go wrong. And as I already said, they are related to each other. We start with ideology because we think it's the strongest driver. And from there, it trickles all down. This is the narratives we have. These are shared beliefs. This is how we see the world, how we interpret the world, how we make sense of the world. And you may say this is, of course, something we do as individuals, like framing. But we still discuss it as a building block of the context because it's out there. This is, as I said, shared belief system. So this is communicated, which leads me to the next building block, language. We do not just describe reality, but language is performative. We prioritize. We put things in the background, in the foreground. And when we use, and we is now often leaders, this is now one of the next building blocks. When leaders are driven by ideology, they use language to communicate goals. This is the next building block. And the goals can, of course, be such that it pushes people. They can be too high, too demanding. They can be unrealistic. You may say it's good to motivate people, but if there's no way that you can reach these goals, then people will find their way to cut corners and to still survive in such a system. And this is, of course, then the responsibility of the leader, and he uses or she uses language to set these goals. But then in turn, above the leader is, so to say, the ideology, and the leader is maybe driven by the belief we have to maximize profit in our company. That's what I said earlier, right? This idea of maximization. So alone, these first four building blocks, ideology, leadership, language, and goals, give you already a flavor how they are related to each other. And from there we come to incentives. I'm not going through all of them, but maybe I stop with incentives. If you set goals, just talking about goals and setting them, but doing nothing about motivating people how to reach them, or what happens if they reach them. How do you sanction what happens if they do not reach them? So this brings us from goals to incentives. And here you can also push people to the limit and beyond. Yeah, and this is basically what our analysis of the context is about. The building blocks that are per se not bad, but can be misused to produce unethical behavior and push people to being ethical blind.
And I don't think that I don't recall that if you use the language of feedback loops specifically within the book, but you certainly talk about both the slippery slope and the virtuous cycle. So when one in the dark pattern and the other in the bright pattern, to talk about how these are reinforcing blocks. So as they come to be the language becomes articulated, the lack of calling out versus the speaking up culture, etc. As these are kind of missed, or the complicity happens, then when it comes around again, then you have that you're on this slippery slope. I mean, there's a quote in the book that talks about how it's easier to be ethical 100% of the time than it is 98% of the time. And I think that, taking that from an individual level to a collective level or social level is that that 2% variability is a feedback reinforcement into the system. It's a positive positive feedback that will further exacerbate the very building blocks that you're identifying.
Maybe if I try to look at this from a different angle, and I start with what Vivian wrote in the chat. She said that yes, we are influenced by situations, but certainly not in cases like someone stealing money from the till, because that is too obvious, right? That's because I want to enrich myself. I want to challenge that with our concept. And there is plenty of research, and we refer to this this one research that I want to use here to challenge this point. Has been done by a psychologist called Greenberg, who hired students for a job in his lab, and he gave them a task, and he told them they would get $10 per hour. And then he explains the task to them, and he tells them that he has to leave now because he has to teach, and the money is in a box, and they can take it when they have done their hours. And it's unobserved. They can steal if they want, but no one can see it. So that's the situation. Then he has a second group of students. They also promised $10. But before he leaves and says, I have to teach now, you take the money out of the box when you finished your hours and leave. Before he does that, he says, well, but we made a mistake. We told you would get $10, but you only get $5. I don't know how this could happen, but miscommunication. And what turned out in the experiment was that those students would steal. And they would steal not to enrich themselves. They would steal because they would find it profoundly unfair that they were promised something that they wouldn't get. So they saw they had the right, and most of them would then steal just the $10 so that they would get what they were promised, right? So this perception of being treated unfairly is an example that shows that the dark pattern applies to any kind of wrongdoing, even if it looks so obviously self-interested and greedy and whatever. Apply this to the engineers at Volkswagen, who are under the pressure to produce a filter technology that complies with US law that has changed. So they have to reduce diesel filters by 2/3, and they have 2 years, and they cannot make it. It's not possible technologically, which links to this point that Ulrich made. One of the elements of the dark pattern is goals you cannot achieve. So these engineers cannot achieve that goal, but they have a superior who yells at them, a CEO who is a psychopath, who kicks out people who say, I have a problem, who doesn't tolerate someone who speaks up. You know that you cannot go to him and say, we cannot make it. You must find a solution. And then you look at the American regulator and you are a bit surprised, because why would they give you such impossible new regulations? And the answer might be, well, because only European car producers produce diesel cars. And by doing, and Europeans at that time were driving roughly 80% diesel cars, Americans just 2%. So you look at this as an engineer and you will think this is not fair. They create an obstacle for us, European producers, to promote and protect their own producers. And again, you have this perception of unfairness. And the rules are not clear. That's another element of our dark pattern. You can cheat a little bit in the lab when your car gets tested. 10% cheating is not illegal, it's okay. So everyone plays tricks in the lab when the tests are done. So you see, all these elements and I could continue and go through all of them, but stop here. What it shows is that they are all mutually reinforcing. And if they come together, it's very difficult to resist and not to do what everyone else around you is doing.
I want to make sure to touch briefly on the bright pattern before we go to discussion for those that haven't read the book, so that we have a chance to illuminate some of the ways in which you're seeing potential responses, or mitigation factors or proactivity based on some of the direct consulting work I think that you've done within organizations. So Guido, do you maybe paint us a little bit of a picture of what the organizations look like and feel like within a bright pattern functioning? And not to say that the bright pattern is the only pattern, because the dark patterns that I would assume continue to function also in the organizations. And so living, I guess, the context of a bright pattern and a dark pattern simultaneously in direct relationship with each other, perhaps in Stora Enso or some of the other examples that you cite in the book. I think not to suggest put any organization on a particular pedestal, but to show other modalities of what it actually looks like when you have these two forces, these different forces that are interplaying with each other.
Yeah, in a way, the bright pattern is just the reverse of the dark pattern, right? So you just don't do these things. You are not a leader who yells and humiliates people and fires them randomly. You just don't do that. You treat people with respect. That's already the foundation, because most of what we describe in the book flows out of the behavior of the CEO, the standard, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, the top people set in the organization. If they are toxic, if they create this climate of fear, it's very difficult to resist. So just don't do that. Treat your team with respect. Create a climate in which it is totally okay to speak up about problematic things. And I know that most organizations claim that they want this kind of climate where you can do this, but I have rarely seen companies really, really doing that, or any kind of organization. We can also include NGOs or transnational organizations, sport organizations, governmental organizations. The one who speaks up gets humiliated, fired, threatened, silenced all the time, because we don't like negative feedback. So you need to create a situation where this is possible. And that requires two things, for instance. It requires a culture in which people know how to listen and know how to speak up, because you can make so many mistakes when you speak up and when you listen to someone speaking up against your own best intentions. For instance, if you speak up, you might moralize the thing in a way that the leader that you talk to feels accused, and no one wants to be morally accused. So we push back. Framing the thing in a neutral way is one thing you can do to avoid that. So you need training. Leaders need training to listen. Employees need training to speak up. You need processes to protect people. You need an anti-retaliation procedure. Stora Enso, the company you mentioned, is an example we use in the book, who has such a mechanism where people who spoke up are accompanied for 2 years by compliance and HR to protect them against subtle retaliation. I mean, very few will just bluntly retaliate and do something that is unacceptable. But I might forget to invite you to a meeting, or I might tell you prepare a presentation on project 1, and in the meeting I tell you now talk about project 2. So I do little things where you cannot accuse me of, because they're just harmless, can be not with intention. So I can defend myself. So these subtle things, people need to be protected against that. And the clear signal at Stora Enso to everyone is we protect them. Compliance and HR protect them together against that kind of retaliation. These are two things. Or Ulrich mentioned the incentives. A lot of companies have applied what they learned from Jack Welch. So they use the Gauss curve to evaluate people. And they say we have high performers, average performers, low performers, and we want to fire those low performers. So every team leader must fire 20% of their people every year, right? That's what Jack Welch introduced, and what since then many organizations have applied. You create Hunger Games inside the company where it's not about me being good, it's about me being better than you, because only one of us will survive, right? So avoiding these things, making it possible to not perform, but then get a solution, a training, maybe a different career in the organization, a conversation. Maybe the leader is responsible. So it shouldn't feel like a threat if I am evaluated. That's important. Leaders shouldn't lead in a toxic way. There shouldn't be unclear rules, but there should be consequences even for small rule breaking. So a lot of things that organizations can do to reduce the risk that we describe in the book.
Thank you, Guido. I'm going to step back now. As much as I have 1,000 other questions that I would like to bring into our discussion, I want to step back so others can step in. So the way that this is going to work for a few people that haven't been in these sessions is we're going to open this up to a virtual fishbowl now. I will create the space. The way we use a fishbowl as compared to an in-person one is we will use the React function. So if you go under React and you raise your hand will bring you into the fishbowl. Similarly, if you're already in the fishbowl and would like to step out, you can raise your hand to come out of the fishbowl. There will be 4 seats. Imagine like 4 chairs inside of the center of a room and us in the outer ring of a circle witnessing that. So we're attempting to simulate that same environment that we would do if we were in person as a fishbowl. So it will be 4 spaces. Maybe Guido, since you have a question that you're going to pose to people, I'll leave you in, and Ulrich, I'll pull you out and then you can come back in later. That's okay. One of the things that we've reflected on as a team is we really would like to have you bring in your own experiences much more into these spaces. This is intended to be a discussion, not so much a Q&A, which I really appreciate some of the questions that have come up. So we're going to flip the script a little bit and try it a different way in this fishbowl, which is Guido has prepared a question that will start off the discussion for those of you that would like to join. So I'm going to first stop recording right now.